The markets surged. Headlines exploded. For about 45 minutes this morning, the world believed the impossible had happened, that Donald Trump had picked up the phone, struck a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and somehow convinced one of America's most determined adversaries to hand over its nuclear materials, open its most strategic waterway, and abandon its proxy network, all before noon. It didn't happen. What happened instead is a story far more dangerous than a failed negotiation. It is a story about how a sitting American president can move global oil markets, redirect shipping traffic, and reshape geopolitical narratives, not through diplomacy, not through verified agreements, but through phone calls to journalists who published his words without a single independent confirmation. Here is what we know with certainty. This morning, President Trump contacted reporters at CBS, Reuters, and Axios. He told them, without written agreement, without Iranian confirmation, and without any supporting intelligence, that Iran had agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz to free passage, that the United States would send excavators into Iranian territory to remove enriched uranium, that Iran would cease funding Hezbollah and all proxy forces, and that American personnel would work directly alongside the Iranian military to extract nuclear material. The markets believed him. They always do. But the ships did not. Shipping data, the kind you can track in real time, told a very different story. Vessels that had begun moving toward the Strait of Hormuz received the same news the markets did. They moved forward. And then, one by one, they made U-turns. Not because of Iranian aggression, because the strait was not, in fact, open, not in the way Trump had described. Not even close. Iran's position, as stated clearly by Foreign Minister IRGC and confirmed by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, was unambiguous. The Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iranian control. Ships would be permitted to pass only along routes pre-approved by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Tolls would be collected. Military vessels, including American warships, were explicitly banned. That is not a deal. That is the status quo with a press release attached. This script is not going to tell you what Trump said. It is going to show you what is actually happening on the water, in the negotiating rooms, and in the data. Stay with us. Subscribe now, because what comes next changes the entire picture. To understand why this moment is so significant, you have to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is, and why Iran has always known that controlling it is the most powerful card in its hand. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel of water, at its tightest point, just 21 miles wide, sitting between the Iranian coastline to the north and Oman to the south. Through this corridor passes approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every major Gulf producer, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, depends on this strait to export its energy. If it closes, the global economy does not slow down. It seizes. Iran has known this for decades. And for decades, whenever the United States or Israel has escalated pressure against Tehran, Iranian military commanders have pointed to the strait as their most credible leverage point. Not nuclear weapons, not missile strikes. The strait. The current crisis did not begin last week. It began with a decision made jointly by the Trump administration and the Israeli government to conduct strikes on Iranian territory. Strikes that targeted nuclear infrastructure and, according to multiple reports, caused significant civilian casualties. The legal basis for those strikes remains disputed. The consequences are not. Iran's response was to invoke what it called a temporary operational restriction on the Strait of Hormuz. Not a full closure, but a controlled chokehold. Ships wanting to pass would need to coordinate with Iranian maritime authorities. Routes were designated. Tolls were announced. This was framed in Tehran not as an act of war, but as a sovereign protective measure during an active military confrontation. Washington called it an illegal blockade. Tehran called it self-defense. The rest of the world called it a crisis. By the time Pakistani mediators entered the picture, facilitating talks in Islamabad between Iranian parliamentary leadership and American officials, including the vice president, both sides had hardened positions, and a fragile, informal ceasefire was all that held the situation together. Iran's 10-point framework, announced in early April, outlined the conditions under which it was willing to negotiate: sanctions relief, compensation for war damages, guaranteed cessation of hostilities, and the right to continue uranium enrichment for civilian purposes. Trump agreed to the framework in principle, and then this morning announced to reporters that Iran had agreed to abandon it entirely. That is where we are, not at the end of a crisis, at a very dangerous new beginning. There are three versions of this morning's events. Let's examine each one carefully. Version 1. The Trump version. Speaking to reporters by phone, not in a press conference, not in a signed statement, not through official White House communications, President Trump made 7 distinct claims. That Iran had agreed to stop enriching uranium, that American and Iranian personnel would jointly enter Iranian territory with excavators to remove enriched nuclear material, that this material would be brought back to the United States, that Iran would cease all funding to Hezbollah and its other proxy forces, that the United States would provide no financial assistance to Iran, that free passage through the Strait of Hormuz was now guaranteed, that the deal was done. These claims were published, largely verbatim, by major American news outlets within minutes. Markets responded immediately. Oil prices dropped. Stocks moved. Version 2. The Iranian version, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament and lead negotiator, responded within the hour. His statement was direct. The President of the United States had made 7 claims in one single hour, and every single one of them was false. The strait was not freely open. Enriched uranium would not be transferred anywhere under any circumstance. No direct talks between American and Iranian officials had taken place. The only mediation occurring was through Pakistan. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson confirmed this. Ship movement through the strait, they clarified, would follow routes designated by Iran. Military vessels remained banned. Any naval blockade by the United States would be considered a ceasefire violation and would trigger a proportional response. Tolls would continue to be charged for the ceasefire's remaining period, per reporting in the Wall Street Journal. Version 3. The data. This is the version that matters most. Real-time shipping data, publicly available, trackable by anyone, showed vessels approaching the strait, beginning to transit, and then reversing course. Not because of an attack, because the passage conditions that Trump had announced did not exist on the water. The ships that followed Trump's announcement found what Iran's statement described, a controlled, restricted, Iranian-managed corridor, not a freely open international waterway. Parliamentary Speaker Ghalibaf said it plainly. Whether the strait is open or closed will be determined by conditions on the ground, not by social media. The ground said, nothing has changed. There is a reason that every serious military strategist, every energy economist, and every geopolitical analyst watches the Strait of Hormuz with a level of attention reserved for almost no other geographic feature on Earth. It is not just a waterway, it is a valve. And right now, Iran holds it. Approximately 17 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That figure represents roughly 1/5 of global oil consumption. It includes the exports of Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter. It includes Qatari liquefied natural gas that powers homes across Europe and Asia. It includes Iraqi crude that funds a government still fragile from 2 decades of war. Remove that corridor from the global supply chain, even partially, and within days the economic consequences become severe. Within weeks, they become structural. This is not hypothetical. In 2019, when Iranian forces seized a British-flagged tanker in the strait, oil prices spiked within 24 hours. That was a single ship. The current situation involves coordinated restrictions on an entire shipping lane. What Iran has done, and what Trump's announcement failed to change, is establish a toll booth model with military enforcement. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, which operates fast attack craft, anti-ship missile batteries, and underwater mine capabilities throughout the Gulf, now functions as the de facto authority governing commercial passage. Ships must request clearance. Routes are specified. Payment is expected. American warships are not permitted. This matters for a very specific strategic reason. It means the United States Navy, the most powerful maritime force in human history, currently cannot freely transit the Strait of Hormuz without triggering a military confrontation with Iran. That is an extraordinary strategic concession, regardless of how it is described in a phone call to journalists. Iran understands what it has. The 10-point framework it put forward in April was not a wish list. It was a negotiating position backed by a credible military threat. Sanctions relief, war damage compensation, and cessation of hostilities. These are the price of reopening the valve. Tehran is not bluffing. The shipping data confirms it. Trump's announcement this morning did not change any of those conditions. It changed stock prices. Temporarily. The most dangerous outcome of this morning is not the failed announcement. It is what the failed announcement makes more likely. When a sitting American president tells the world that the Strait of Hormuz is open and ships move on that information, and those ships are turned back or, worse, stopped by Iranian maritime forces operating under their own authority, the potential for miscalculation escalates immediately. One detained vessel, one confrontation between a commercial ship and an IRGC fast boat, one captain who believed the President of the United States and found out the hard way that the President of the United States was wrong. Any of those scenarios carries the risk of rapidly expanding beyond a maritime incident. This is not a theoretical concern. It is the direct consequence of announcing facts that do not exist. Beyond the immediate flashpoint risk, consider what this morning revealed about the broader negotiating landscape. Iran's spokesperson confirmed that talks mediated by Pakistan, held in Islamabad, are continuing, but that their scope is far wider than previously disclosed. These are not just nuclear talks. They encompass the Strait of Hormuz, the future of Lebanon, sanctions relief, war reparations, and the status of Iran's full resistance network, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, treated in Iran's framing as a single indivisible file. Iran's position is that these issues cannot be separated. You cannot negotiate the strait without negotiating the war. You cannot negotiate the war without negotiating the proxies. Meanwhile, in a separate but connected development, the Trump administration quietly lifted sanctions on Russian oil purchases for another month, just 48 hours after Treasury Secretary Bessent publicly stated those sanctions would not be renewed. The pattern is consistent. Statements are made, opposites occur, markets react. The correction comes quietly, later when attention has moved on. There is also the matter of Lebanon. Trump posted this morning that Israeli strikes on Lebanese targets were prohibited under the ceasefire framework. Netanyahu's government immediately sought clarification. Within hours, the White House walked it back, confirming that Israel retains the right to strike in what it defines as self-defense. Israeli strikes on Lebanese targets resumed. What does all of this tell us? It tells us that the situation remains profoundly unresolved. The ceasefire is fragile, contested on multiple fronts, and operating without a shared factual foundation between the parties. Iran has stated clearly that the current period is a pause, not an end, and that the conditions for a full cessation of hostilities have not been met. The Strait of Hormuz remains under Iranian authority. The negotiation has not concluded, and the most consequential question, whether American leadership can produce an agreement that matches its announcements, remains entirely unanswered. Watch the shipping data. Watch the strait. Watch what the ships do. Because right now, the ships know more than the headlines. If you want to stay ahead of what is actually happening, not what is being claimed, subscribe now. Hit the notification bell, because this story is not over. It is barely beginning.